Hi, my name's Gael Baldock. I'm running for the Waitemata local board. One of my pledges is that I will protect parks, trees and waterways, particularly mature trees. I'm here today with Billy McLean, and Billy and I met a number of years ago, just after I was the appellant to the Environment Court protecting Western Springs Forest to try and stop the felling of about 200 trees that had about another 50 years of life left in them. The trees were planted in 1926 to hold the bank together and to shelter the new suburb around there of Westmere Grey Lynn, to shelter it from the southerly winds. As the appellant to the Environment Court, I also became aware of a small arboretum of amazing trees in Canal Road in New Lynn, which is where I met Billy. So Billy, if you'd like to tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Billy McLean. I've been a practicing arborist for about 20 years. I've been qualified for about 15 of those. I've recently got my bat handler certificates, so I'm just sort of branching into ecology from arboriculture. I've started to notice within our industry that there is a big disconnect between ecology and arboriculture, where from a young age I was taught that fauna and flora are so symbiotically connected to each other that you cannot separate them, yet here we are, separating them.
Poisoning felling. Sorry Billy, I like to say that there are tree fellers. Those are the guys with chainsaws that go and slaughter trees, and there are tree fellows. And the tree fellows know about the trees, care about the trees, care about the wildlife, and my connection with you is you are obviously one of those fellows.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's even down to the arboriculture industry itself. Is you care as much as you want, without training and without being educated that there are things living in and on and depending on these trees, then it's hard to manage it and maintain the urban ngahere when you don't understand what ngahere is. That's not a rākau, that's a tree. A tree by itself isn't ngahere.
And so that was the important thing about Western Springs Forest, is underneath this canopy of Monterey pines was a native ngahere that was starting to grow, and the method of killing those trees and forming all this chip cost the ratepayers nearly $2 million and destroyed about 15,000 native trees.
Yeah, it's the methodology that needs to change. I'm trying to focus on conservation arboriculture, which is really unappreciated and misunderstood in this country fully. It's not about not cutting down trees, it's about getting the job done appropriately and using that tree as the resources for its final phase of life, like it should, if it was to naturally fall. Instead of turning all of that useful resource and habitat into chip, it can be used for a myriad of different things. Erosion control, drainage in the ground, it can be used to feed the ground. It's habitat for insects. And speaking of
feeding the ground, let's move the conversation to somewhere that's not quite as wet, because we've got this great rain, which of course the trees need right now, but we don't. So how about we stop this and find another little spot under some cover before we get drowned.
Yeah.
Alright, let's move to the side. Perfect. Okay, so we had to race in out of the rain, but that's obviously one of the important parts of the ecological value of trees, is about rain, precipitation, water from the ground.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so the canopies of these trees, they've just prevented 40% of that rain we were in from hitting the ground. There's none of it here, the ground is still dry. The water still reaches the ground, it's just not in a state that can flood and damage the land. the leaves are designed to catch that rain and send it down the branches, down the trunks, and directly to the root systems where it should be. The root systems hold together the soil. Like if there is to be a big flood come through anywhere, if you don't have vegetation holding together that soil, then all of that soil ends up as sediment in a stream and out in the ocean. It's the biodiversity within the soil that holds it together. It's not just the root system from one tree, and that's where we talk about ngahere rather than one tree by itself, is the connection that's made between the rākau to form the ngahere. The ngahere encompasses everything that lives from the soils, through the trees, up into the canopies, and everything that's dependent on it, and it's just totally misunderstood and undervalued completely.
And Auckland Council has a plan to increase the urban ngahere, but they are the biggest fellers of trees, and particularly of the mature trees. So one of the reasons that I want to get into this in politics is to stop that decimation of the trees, and the very first thing in that is bringing back tree protection. So one of the other areas where we talked about was regarding the bat population. And you said to me, we've lost 70% of the bat population in the last 10 years, and I said, is that because of the tree protection being removed?
Yeah, and it was strangely, sounds weird, but I was surprised that someone else had mentioned it, because I've been saying that for a long time and it just falls on deaf ears. I know data is data and research is research, and probably a 5-year-long investigation needs to be done by our central government, but it's really not hard to join those dots that the reason our bats have been elevated to nationally critically endangered is because the populations that we do know of, they have dropped by 70% in 10 years. Well, 10 years ago we lost tree protection. Bats live in trees. I mean, how much more data do you need? Yeah, but the issue that we have had with the loss of population, combined with pest control, obviously, because we are losing big numbers to pests, but we're also losing entire colonies to chippers, unfortunately. The defence mechanism of our native bats is to hide, and that's why we don't know that we've got them, because they do a bloody good job of it. But when you fell a tree and it hits the ground, and then you chip that whole thing into the back of a truck, the entire colony of bats goes with it. And there's no way of knowing that you've even done it other than the stinky smell that you get from bats being chipped.
So just to make that clear so that everyone knows, is the tree gets felled, the bat colony's in there, some of those bats have been killed by the felling, some are damaged, some of them are perfectly alive, the mothers are going to be staying with their babies, and if that tree goes straight from being cut down straight into the chipper, so are the baby bats, so are the adult bats, they're all going through the chipper.
Entire colonies where if you just left that tree to sit on the ground overnight, then the survivors of that colony can fly out of that tree and go and find another colony tree that they have. They've got, one colony can have, who knows, 30, 40 trees that they're using all year round. And if they happen to be in that one that's being felled that day, then it's blasted through the chipper and they're gone. It's the whole colony gone. It's genocide. Yeah,
it is. And so those bats, what are they feeding on?
Insects. Yeah.
So all those mosquitoes that we don't want, they're going to be eating those.
Yep. Micro moths and mosquitoes is what they predominantly prey on, and that's part of why I think bats are severely undervalued, because we don't really know that, we haven't known for a long time that they are there and in what numbers. In any country that has out of control mosquito populations, what do you have?
Well, there's lots of food for bats there, and there's lots of food for thought there.
Yeah, But unfortunately for humans, there's also lots of room for parasites and real nasty stuff like typhoid and malaria and all the ugly things that come with out of control mosquito populations. If there's nothing there to keep that in control.
We've got the bats at night and we've got the fantails in the daytime.
Yeah.
I love those fantails. I've got a couple of fantails in my garden that have been there since the decimation of Western Springs. They've lost their habitat and so they've come to my garden.
Yeah.
And they're cheeky little things. They cheep away and they dive bomb and get all the insects, and effectively the bats are the night version of that.
Yeah, the bats are doing the same thing. They use echolocation to find their food. But one bat by itself can decimate like 3,000 mosquitoes in one night.
Oh, well, I want one in my room.
Yeah. But a colony of 100 bats, I mean, it's not hard to do the maths, man.
No.
300,000 insects taken out of the sky in one night.
Yay.
And then there's the guano factor from these bats. I mean, their metabolism rate is ridiculously high for a mammal to fly. They have to just keep churning through their food source, and that's exactly what they do. They just churn through their food source all night long. But they also spray that valuable guano on the ground. That's the most valuable fertilizer that we've ever had in history. Wars were fought over guano.
And I can understand that because I remember finding out that we, as in every piece of life on this planet, lives in 6 inches of soil. And we need to keep fertilising that soil in order for things to grow, for us to eat, for us to have this habitat. 6 inches of soil, and we need to keep replenishing it.
And that's the value of these trees that's totally underappreciated, is that the biodiversity in those healthy soils that you're talking about, they should be sequestering 3 times more than the trees that are growing in there. And the trees, like everybody knows that trees sequester carbon, and it's a well-known fact. But when people say that,
we don't all know that soil sequesters carbon. So that's really interesting.
The soil itself doesn't, but the life in that soil, the microorganisms, there's thousands of different types of microorganisms in that soil, and we're all carbon-based life on this planet. For that microorganisms to proliferate in the soil, they have to be sequestering carbon. They get that from the trees. That's part of the connection. So when you hear about carbon sequestration and you think, what is that? Well, it's basically a tree snatching carbon out of the air, and this is how it happens. On the bottom of its leaf, it has a cell called a stomata that opens and closes, and it just randomly snatches in different gases and compounds. When it snatches in carbon dioxide or CO2, it'll drag that in. Through photosynthesis, it snaps off the C and it spits out the O2. So it's kept the carbon and it's spat out the oxygen for us to breathe.
So I can breathe.
Yeah, absolutely. But that carbon is part of what it uses to grow. And these trees all around us have 40% carbon. So a tree like these big trees over here around us, that might be 20, 30 tons worth of trees sitting there. 40% of that's carbon. So, you got 10 tons worth of carbon sitting just in one tree around us. But the soils as well. The soil should be sequestering 3 times more than the tree is. I mean, it's impressive to say that there's 10 tons worth of carbon sitting here and there's 10 tons worth of carbon there, but there should be 30 tons of carbon between these 2 trees and the ground.
Speaking of us living in about 6 inches of soil on this planet, and when I say us, I mean all the life on the planet is in about 6 inches of soil. One of the interesting things in that is the fungi that are there, and that the trees feed other trees through the fungi in what's called the wood wide web. Cool name, wood wide web. And that's why mature trees have nurseries of seedlings underneath them, because they are making all of this food and then feeding it to their babies.
Yeah, they feed the funguses that are in the soils. We only basically see the flowering part of a fungus. When we say fungus, most people think of a mushroom.
Yeah.
The mushroom itself is the fruiting body of a much more complex organism that lives in the soil. That starts off as hyphae, that's microscopic. It's to look at it under a microscope, it's almost like a thread of hair that forms a Y shape, and then that Y breaks off, and then that forms another one that forms a Y that breaks off. When those all join together in the soil, that's called mycelium, and you see it when you break the soil open, and it's got that kind of web, kind of
so
white.
It really is a web.
It is literally is a web. Well, that organism itself has no access to light, and it has no energy. It can't sustain its own energy. So it attaches itself to the root systems of trees and plants, and through the root systems, through osmosis in the root systems, the trees share the energy that they create through photosynthesis to feed to the fungal networks, and the fungal networks are breaking down the nutrients in the soil to a state where the trees can feed on it. So the trees are feeding the fungi energy, and the fungi are feeding the trees nutrients. It's
symbiotic.
It's a fascinating network beneath the soils, and that's where you get this carbon sequestration within the soils. It's within that mycelium network and within all the other organisms that are in that soil, in a healthy soil, which we don't unfortunately have in any of the cities. They've been oversprayed and just disrespected to the point of close sterility, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's why we also notice the difference in the number of insects that used to hit the windscreen when we were kids,
Yep.
and what hit the windscreen now, and we're destroying
Yep.
this whole interrelated ecosystem of the flora and fauna, which is really unfortunate. But one of the things that we can do in order to give value again to this, you were talking about before, is where you said that if we put a monetary value on a tree, then we can get people to think a different way. You talked about your own property with having a couple of totara on it. If you just want to briefly tell us how that would work.
Yeah. So for an example, the property that I've got is, we'll say, just for argument's sake, it's an $800,000 property as it stands at the moment. The trees have no value whatsoever,
Monetary value.
monetary-wise. If they were assessed properly and a value agreed upon and attached to those trees, which can be done quite easily with arboricultural assessments and reports. It's not a hard thing to do at all.
And they do it elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. The frameworks are all there. So, say, for example, they are big trees. They are big, mature, beautiful, very unique looking totara trees. So if they had a value, and it's hard to just shoot a value out there, but to keep things simple, we'll say those trees are worth $50,000 each.
Well, these are $100,000.
There's $100,000.
800 of land and another 100,000 of tree value.
That's right, because the trees are valued. So now when I come to sell my property, I sell it for $900,000. That person buys the property for $900,000, and what would have normally cost them, say, I don't know, $5,000 to $10,000 to fell those trees and get rid of them, it's still going to cost them $5,000 to $10,000 to do that work, but essentially they've lost $100,000 of their house value.
Yeah.
Then that would force people to appreciate trees for what they are and value them how they should be. And
particularly the more mature trees, which
Absolutely.
are more necessary. And and for that nursery of babies growing underneath. And when it comes to places like Western Springs Forest, would have had a completely different value on what would have gone down as far as they did a health and safety, which was a whole lot of BS. But the other lot of trees this arboretum that we lost was at Canal Road in New Lynn, and there were some incredibly unique trees there planted nearly 100 years ago by a woodwork teacher and native species. Do you want to talk to a bit about that?
Yeah. So Canal Road, that was just another ecological disaster that didn't really need to happen at all. I mean,
no.
I think there was 91 trees there, from memory.
Oh, well, let's call it 100 trees at about 100 years of age. And I know that the council were asked if they could purchase the land or they could swap it out with somewhere else. But unfortunately, that battle was lost, and it still hasn't been built on all these years later.
No, the trees are still laying on the ground. I've seen it recently, and I mean, the trees hit the ground and the contractors walked away, and that was the end of it. And this is where we have this systemic issue that because those trees have no value, then, especially in the area like it was in Canal Road, they become less than worth nothing, and they're actually a pain for people to have, and it seems
if they
bizarre.
want to develop the land,
right.
because if it's all about developing the land and it's all about building housing, and there's a whole other thing we can get into about how silly it is, the amount of density that the government are trying to push through at the moment, and Plan Change 78, etc. But in those trees that were in that arboretum, there were some very special trees.
Oh, absolutely. There were some really rare specimens, and it seems bizarre that in New Zealand we do have specimens of trees that are rare. Even to me it sounds strange.
Native trees
that are
specimens of native trees that are really rare, that are
on a protected list. Like Kawaka was a good example. Miro was another one.
There was a black something. Do you know what that was?
Oh, not off the top of my head. I can't remember what that was. But it wasn't just the species of trees, it was the specimens that they were too. I mean, there was Peruri and Totara and Pahurakawa, all the trees that we're familiar with, but the specimens that they were on this property were just epic. It was such a loss to the entire city to have lost those trees. I mean, we've been talking about the ecological value and the environmental value of trees, but I mean, there's a social value as well, where especially places like Canal Road and Mangere, Otara, where trees have been decimated and there is no canopy left, that decimates communities, and you can see it in statistics. It's a well-known fact that leafy green suburbs are successful, economically viable. They have residents in that community that are more educated and inspired than people that are in decimated vegetation-free areas. And it's to do with this thing called a biophilic response that all humans have. It's part of our survival mechanism, where for hundreds and thousands of years we've been existing with nature, and if we are in an arid and desolate environment where there is no vegetation around us, then there's no food, there's no resources, and your whole body goes into a state of stress where you need to get out of that place, where the recognition of nature, green, uneven shapes, and you'll see it in high-end hairdressers and fashion stores and shopping malls. You look for the fake green blurb, even if it's just a green swirl on a wall, that triggers the biophilic response in your mind that you have resources around you, you can relax, you can focus on what you're doing, you can spend your money. Kids at schools that are raised where they can look out the window and see a tree are measurably more educated and more inspired than kids that look out the window and see desolate buildings and industrial zones.
One of the other trees that the community have come out and protected in the Waitemata local board area is the tree called Tiha in Sir Duff Mai Robinson Park next to the Rose Garden. and this is a magnificent Pahutakawa tree, and Te Ha is the life breath. That's the word ha, and when we hongi, that's what we're doing, is sharing life force and life breath. So the cultural value of trees is huge as well.
Yeah, from my understanding, our recognised cultural greeting is the hongi, and from what I know of it is that it is the acknowledgement and respect that there is a force called the ha, or the life essence. That first breath, your first breath, was provided to you by the rako. That's what I was taught.
And the raka are the trees.
The trees, yeah, the trees. That's right. The rako are trees. Yeah. So we have this recognised cultural greeting that acknowledges and respects that your first breath came from the trees. It's not just your first breath, it's every breath you take.
Every breath we take.
And I don't know if it's culturally recognised or not, but in my mind, if it's my breath, then it's not just your breath and your breath and your breath, but the birds.
And the insects.
The worms.
The bats.
Out to the whales.
The whales, the dolphins that we also need to be protecting.
All of that is connected, and to not value it is just bizarre.
But it's also all the breaths that have happened over all the time that there's been anything living on this planet, because all the water has come through.
That's a water cycle that has moved through the trees,
and the air's moved through.
Everything that we've discussed up until this point has been acknowledged scientifically and is data and specs that we acknowledge as scientific truths. Long before that, we had a cultural acknowledgement and respect for that. Based on that alone, shouldn't there be some kind of customary protection over these?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because my belief is, in the same way that in a dispute over a child custody, the children get represented by a lawyer, I think it's really important when things go to the Environment Court that the environment has her own lawyer, has her own protection. And when I say she, I'm talking Mother Earth, that all of these components of when you're looking at, when I was the appellant to the Environment Court on Western Springs, that needed to have someone independent representing that significant ecological area, those trees, the method of taking out the trees to not destroy as much as it did. That is something that I think is incredibly important. And that comes across too in other things, because we've got in our area where someone wants to have a private helipad in a residential area, and how that affects all the neighbours around them. And so it's not just the people that are affected, it's all the bird life as well. And
the birds and the bats and the insects, everything
that happens when everything's all sort of the helicopters bringing up the dust and throwing it around and scaring off the birds from their habitat. The environment needs to have a lawyer.
Well, I think if the environment isn't recognised as an entity of its own, then we've got no choice, because that's how a court system works. If you're not an entity, then you're not acknowledged and you're not recognised. And unfortunately, in our capitalist environment that we have, the disconnection between the value of these trees and the true value they actually have to us as humans. I mean, I think we all forget that nature doesn't need us.
Exactly.
At all.
We need nature, but nature doesn't need us.
100%. We survive because there is nature. Everything you have, everything you see, everything you smell, everything you taste, everything you own comes from nature.
And we've got to keep remembering that we live on this one little planet with a really thin atmosphere, a thin soil, just going through space, and we can sometimes get too involved in the economics and the politics and not really think about the planet itself and how important that is.
And when it's done properly, it stimulates economy, and it
Absolutely.
helps communities grow and flourish and focus on what they should be focusing on, the communities and their environment and the things around them.
And New Zealand has put out to the rest of the world that we're clean and green. We need to get back to being clean and green,
Yeah.
and to respect our environment,
Yeah,
and to bring back tree protection.
yeah, 100%.